Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Innovations in Violence Prevention and Treatment series. Uh, I'm Etienne Aldarondo, and I'm honored to serve as the Executive Director of the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment in Miami. For 28 years, the Melissa Institute has been a trusted source of information on violence prevention, safe communities, and mental health worldwide. Today, more than 100,000 people from over 130 countries have benefited from the Institute's educational resources and its trainings. In addition, we frequently consult with and provide research-based information on violence prevention and treatment to diverse organizations locally in South Florida and across the country. It is really exciting for us uh, to see that for today's session, we have over 70 registered participants from municipalities across the state, from about 11 or 12 states in the United States, and from Canada. Welcome, welcome all. Please be aware that the Institute's training, like the one that you're about to participate in, and the educational materials accessible through our websites and our YouTube channel are prepared with the guidance and support of our renowned members of our scientific board, and are available to you for free. All we ask in exchange is that you use this information and these materials to support your efforts to repair the world. If your situation allows it, please consider donating to support our programs. Today, we're all going to be joined by two of our esteemed scientific board members, Dr. Debra Pepler and Dr. Leena Augimeri. Uh, Let me tell you a little bit about who they are, and you will come to know a lot more about them as the presentation unfolds. Dr. Leena Augimeri is a renowned scientist practitioner, co-founder of SNAP, the Stop and Now Plan program, and developer of EARL, Early Assessment Risk List. With over 40 years of experience, her work focuses on advancing children's mental health, crime prevention, and measurement-based care. Dr. Augimeri developed a comprehensive framework targeting young children exhibiting antisocial and disruptive behavior, with SNAP serving as a core trauma-informed intervention that helps children aged 6 to 11 improve emotional regulation, self-control, and problem-solving skills. Her leadership expanded SNAP into digital programs for schools and youth justice systems, positively impacting thousands globally. Dr. Augimeri work includes developing the EARL risk assessment tool, now in the third version, which integrates gender and cultural considerations. She has led multi-million dollar initiatives and raised over $25 million in funding uh, to help scale SNAP across 160 communities in Canada. Dr. Augimeri has received numerous prestigious awards, including the Prime Minister Regional Social Innovation Award and the CAMH Difference Makers Award. In November 2024, she will receive the Research Canada Advocacy in Leadership Award and the King Charles III Coronation Medal. Her lifelong mission focuses on early intervention, evidence-based practices, and creating safer communities by fostering the well-being of children and youth. Dr. Debra Pepler is a distinguished research professor of psychology at York University. Her research has focused on relationships within the family and peer group, with a growing interest in the importance of healthy relationships for healthy development. She developed an innovative observational method to study aggression, bullying, and victimization. Her research on peer and family relationships has been embedded in interventions such as breaking the cycle for substance using mothers and their young children, bullying prevention with the Toronto Board of Education, SNAP, for aggressive children and their parents, Pine River Institute for Youth with Addictions and Mental Health Problems, and the Canadian Red Cross for Violence Prevention in Indigenous Communities. Dr. Pepler co-founded and co-led PrevNet, Promoting Relationships and Eliminating Violence Network, to promote healthy relationships and prevent bullying for children and youth. To learn more about this, you can visit the link that is being dropped in the chat right now. In today's session, Deb and Leena are going to take us in a journey to understand what I see, I cannot unsee, and what I hear, I cannot unhear. We will explore with them how exposure to violence at a young age disrupts emotional development, influences behavior, and shapes future relationships. We're also going to be talking about actionable solutions. And for this purpose, we have a guest panelists are going to be joining us, Dr. Naomi Andrews and Ms. Lisa Sura, and both of who will be properly introduced by our presenters. Now, please help me give a warm welcome to our presenters today, Debra Pepler and Leena Augimeri.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's a real honor being with you here today. And first of all, before we begin, we really want to congratulate you, Dr. Tony Alvarado, for the incredible award that you received in your excellent knowledge and field of gender-based violence and family violence. So congratulations, and really an honor to be here as well with Dr. Don Meichenbaum, who has been somebody who we have followed all our entire careers and who has mentored us. So really an honor to be here with everybody.
Yes, thanks, Lee.
Okay, so today, as Dr. Alvarado has said, we really are going to focus on Innocence Interrupted, how gender-based violence affects children and youth, from observation to impact to solutions. And what I see, I cannot see. What I hear, I cannot unhear. And really important topic. Before we begin, we want to really focus on a land acknowledgement. This is something that we believe strongly in. So we, Dr. Debra Pepler and I, are honored to be here today with everyone on this webinar. We're from what they call Takaranto, which is really Toronto, on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, which we are in Mississauga right now, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The Melissa Institute of Violence Prevention and Treatment is located on the beautiful Tequesta, Seminole, and Miccosukee lands, and we recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on these lands. We also acknowledge that racism and colonialism are both historic as well as present, and that it is our responsibility to serve as allies, to listen, to respect, to learn, and to do better. My family are settlers on this beautiful land. They originally came from the Ukraine and Italy. Deb's family is also originally from Europe. And we are so honored to be born and live in our community, what we call the dish with one spoon, and call it home. And we're honored to be here with you today. So we hope that the learning objectives that we're going to talk about really are about identifying the long-term and short-term psychological, emotional, and behavioral impacts of gender-based violence on children and youth who witness and experience it. We hope to analyze the progression from observation of gender-based violence to potential later victimization and really explain early exposure. We also want to assess and articulate effective intervention strategies. And that's why we have two incredible guests with us today. We're also going to be sharing some other program information. So you heard the introduction. I'm Leena, this is Debra, and you'll hear from Dr. Naomi Andrews and also Lisa Sura. So we also want to share this with you. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the presentation we're about to discuss does address topics related to gender-based violence and its impact on children and youth. And these are deeply, deeply sensitive subjects. And I understand that this content may be difficult for some. If you feel at any point that you need to step away, take a break, speak to someone, please feel free to do so. Your well-being is important. So thank you for your understanding. So Deb and I, as we started to really think about this, we always start our conversations with why, our why. And a lot of times, and this is the golden circle Simon Sinek talks about, you know, a lot of times people talk about what they do, how they do, and why they do it. But really, he says, really, you need to start with the why. And so I'm going to, Deb, what's your why?
Up here. My why is that there are some kids and now a lot of kids who are in trouble, and they're in trouble with mental health problems, with lack of regulation, without the supportive relationships they need for healthy development. And we need to respond to this. And I really liked this phrase that Weisberg said, that we're not going to medicalize or therapize our way out of mental health crisis. There's no magic drug. There are not enough therapists to do this work. And I would add that we can't harshly discipline our way out of the crisis either, because harsh teaches harsh behavior. So we need a developmental relational approach, a real understanding of children's development. We'll talk about this later, and also an understanding of the importance, the vital importance of caring relationships in children and youth's lives.
Thanks, Deb. And if I have really learned, I've learned so much from Deb. Deb and I have worked together. She brought me to the organization I was with for 40 years. We've developed an incredible relationship of trust and understanding and shared learning. Is about relationships, Deb. And that is something that I'm very thankful. So thank you. So my why is that what often gets lost in the narrative of the perpetrators is that many of these individuals who engage in violent behaviors are exposed to violence in their formative years. It doesn't mean that I'm abdicating. I'm not saying that they're not responsible. They are responsible for their actions. But what we know is that many of them are faced with inadequate emotional support or never learned healthy ways of expressing themselves using effective self-control or emotional regulation strategy. And as a society, we have a critical opportunity to intervene. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about 7 years of warning and 7-year incubation period throughout this webinar. And if you look at the records of individuals who are incarcerated, 60% will tell you that they had problems when they were younger. So imagine if we could have intervened. So we're talking about relationships, and we're talking about intervention and intervening. So our why is really that the early intervention is critical before these cycles of violence become entrenched. And today we're not going to really delve into the multitude of facts and numbers and all that. Really, we're focusing on the adult. Instead, we're going to bring you back to what we feel is a crucial part of all of this, which is our children and our why. And we talk about they are our children. It's not the children, it's our children, which is the focus of our webinar today. So what we want to also do before we go into this is we want to acknowledge the Melissa Institute and Dr. Attman, Michael Attman and Lynn Attman, who really started the Melissa Institute, as Tony had indicated. And given the focus of this conversation is about gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, Melissa, who this institute is named after, wrote a final exam. And in her final exam, it was about violence against women. And she says, attempts to break the human spirit and destroy the state of mind of those involved. And in spite of the brutality imposed on them, she wrote, women always, most always find ways of source of strength. And so we really want to, in this honor of Melissa and others, gender-based violence, this is what we want to focus on. So here it is. What I see, I cannot unsee, and what I hear, I cannot unhear. And what we want to think about is when we think about the child and we think about all the things that can be impeding on this beautiful young person, we need to think about everything from pre-pregnancy to pregnancy, to families, to violence, to community, to homeschool, for example, and others. And what role does everybody have in regards to this? And what we want to think about is more than just justifying the problem. This webinar will also focus on actionable solutions, from early intervention strategies to the support services needed to break the cycle, such as increasing self-control and emotion regulation and other essential skills. Because what we have learned is there are all kinds of social determinants of health. And you saw that relationships, like we started, are at the forefront of this. They really should be the base. But when things go wrong, that's where we see sad kids getting in conflict with the law, and we see kids even using weapons. And so we need to think about all the kinds of things that might have gone adverse childhood experiences. And what we know is what happens to you does matter. And this is something that Deb and I have been studying for over 40 years. So when we think about the individual child, we need to think about them in the context of their family. We need to think about the context of their neighborhood, but we also have to think about schools and peers and thinking about how we deal with each of these in the same way or different ways. And so what we want to focus now a little bit is explaining a little bit from a very general perspective, what is the definition and scope of interpersonal violence and gender-based violence? So we know that it refers to harmful acts directed at an individual based on their gender. It can include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and other forms of violence that disproportionately affects individuals based on their gender identity. And it's also important to rethink about that regardless of the various settings, it can include home, schools, and community, and that it has pervasive, far-reaching impacts. These are not just personal matters. We talk about it being the secret in a lot of these homes and families, but societal crisis that demands really our urgent attention and our action. And really, as I said, it has the impact not only on the immediate victims, but far-reaching effects on families, communities, and public, and really our most vulnerable population, kids, our children. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And thinking about, hopefully, these comprehensive approaches that we need to think about. So data, just from a very general perspective, data indicates that 1 in 3 women, and 1 in 4 men will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, often at the hands of an intimate partner. Indigenous women face significantly higher rates of violence, being 3 times more likely to experience violence compared to non-Indigenous women. And then we have to think about the trauma and lasting impact on victims, families, communities that can't even be understated or understood. And this, I think, is what we need to think about. This could be you, this could be your mom, this could be your wife, your sister, your daughter, your aunt, niece, or friend. And so we need to really think about this. So age, race, disability, immigration status, gender expression, it doesn't discriminate. And there are all kinds of intersects to impact risk and protective factors, as well as access to service that we need to be thinking about. We also know there is a high economic impact annually with regards to healthcare, justice system, and lost productivity. And we also know that victims experience physical, emotional, and psychological trauma, leading to mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And these aren't just personal tragedies. Let's again think about the immediate interaction. We have to think about how that impacts our developing child. So when we think about this issue, and we think about women who have children or eventually will have children, we need to think about the impact on their social and emotional well-being. So exposure to intimate partner violence accounts for 45% of children maltreatment. Think about it, 1 in 3, 45% of child maltreatment. So children who witness family violence have twice the rate of psychiatric disorders as those from non-violent homes. And we also know this impacts their behavior, their self-control, their poor decision-making. And so we need to think about gender-based violence, which they're at risk for, serious criminal and antisocial behavior, social, emotional, behavioral problems, and poor education and employment outcomes. So children who grow up in environments where conflict is resolved through anger or violence and are exposed to family violence are much more likely to adopt similar strategies in their relationships and exhibit behavioral problems, struggle with their academics or school, and face an increased risk of being future perpetrators of victims of violence themselves. So the cycle of violence perpetuates itself, and Deb and I are going to share some examples more, and we're also going to hear from Lisa and Naomi. In the context of our schools, these statistics translate to a significant number of students who may be suffering silently, because what we talk about, it is the silent.
Mhm.
Everybody is silent about it. Violence is profound, leading to physical injuries, psychological trauma, and detrimental effects on academic performance and social development. And I'm going to show the brain later, and you'll see how it impacts the developing brain. When we think about infants and toddlers, and you're going to hear from Lisa soon, what we'll see is the exposure to interpersonal violence is one of the most frequently sustained forms of maltreatment. And significant gap in services for infant toddlers exposed to interpersonal violence is absolutely there. What we need to think about, there's a disproportionately exposed to interpersonal violence due to proximity and dependence on the caregiver.
Mhm.
Kids are at home, right? And this is something we've talked a lot about. Developmentally vulnerable due to stage of their brain development, you're going to see that impacted more severely than older children. We also know that 1 in 3 young people, and Deb's going to speak more about bullying and how this interacts in these children's lives, the interdependencies really that we're talking about in relationships, that 1 in 3 young people will experience an abusive or unhealthy relationship. We know that dating abuse is pattern of course of intimidating or manipulative behavior. And you can see everything from physical, sexual, financial, digital, stalking, media, you name it. And what we also know is that 33% of teens who were in an abusive relationship never told anyone about what was going on. And that 50%, half of the individual experienced dating violence will attempt suicide. And so we need to really think about the impact of all of this. So at the core of interpersonal violence, what we have been looking at more closely is the lack of self-control and poor emotion regulation. And MRI studies of children with behavioral problems have found evidence of abnormalities in both structure of the brain and its function. And most often, research has found children with behavior problems have lower gray matter volume compared to healthy children in the prefrontal areas of the cortex, the cingulate cortex, and parts of the limbic system. And those areas also tend to show decreased activity compared to healthy children when they're asked to regulate their emotions or stop particular behavior. And I'm very thankful with Deb and her team at Sick Kids and U of T, who really looked at this a lot more closely with resting rate also, but also EEGs and then MRIs with Dr. Nathan Kola. So here you can see is the brain. And you can see the areas that control impulsivity and inhibition, as well as emotion regulation. And what they see is somehow with kids displaying antisocial behavior, you can see that they are really in the same areas of that brain that control these major issues like emotion regulation and inhibition. So we need to think about how can we repair this, and it can.
Great. Thanks, Leena, so much. We're really looking at the development of problem behaviors, because if we can understand how these behaviors develop, we can understand what we need to do to prevent them. And for us, that's the most important thing, because people who have experienced interpersonal violence struggle, their children struggle, and the developmental trajectories are so risky, as Leena said. So a developmental relational perspective really suggests that you should put on binoculars in order to understand the problem. And when we're looking at children with problem behavior, we often just look at the child and say, oh, this child's, having difficulties, it's difficult in class, wish I could have that child out of my class or whatever. But we need not only to look at the child, but also to the relationships in which that child's embedded. So when I'm talking about a developmental perspective, let's just go back for 1 sec. When I'm talking about a developmental perspective, I'm looking at thinking about assessing and being aware of the child or youth's needs, their strengths. We should absolutely focus on their strengths. And the challenges that they face. They may be academic challenges, they may be self-control, understanding emotions, controlling emotions. But that's only part of the picture, because we have to think about the relationships that that child's growing up in. From the moment that child is born, relationships shape their development. And so the question we need to ask is, are those relationships adequate to nurture the child's social and emotional competency so that that child can function well in all aspects of life as they move forward? So when we look at the developmental perspective, it's the focus on the child's development, but that evolves from both an interaction of nature and nurture, and they're constantly interacting. We know so much about that now that we didn't know about when I was a graduate student and working with Don Meichenbaum as his teaching assistant. We now know that genes turn on and off depending on the experiences that children live through. So questions we should ask is, what's the typical developmental progression for a child? What do children typically do at a given age that's appropriate, and we expect that, and they need to accomplish those tasks in order to function at school? But in looking at a specific child, we need to look at the child's developmental timing. And are these children going much more slowly than the typical progression, and they're just not acquiring the skills they need to function at a given level, at a given grade level, along with their typical peers? But we also need to ask if they're a bit faster, because what we found in our research on children who are aggressive is, even though they don't have the skills and capacities, they move along the developmental spectrum, the developmental pathway, faster than their peers. So they're dating faster, they're away from the home faster, they're orienting to peers faster. So developmental timing is really important so that children are embedded in a peer group that's synchronous with them. And then for a child, we need to say, well, where are the developmental lags that this child has, and how can we build supports for that area of development? So also, when we're thinking about a developmental perspective, and I think this understanding really came from my work that I was doing with Leena, we need to think about, well, what have these children not developed that we know should be promoted so that they can live a healthy, happy, productive, engaged life? And through the SNAP program, we've really learned about the importance of self-regulation, which of course starts in infancy. From the moment a child's born, the parents co-regulate the child and teach regulation through their interactions. But similarly, what has developed for children who are experiencing behavior problems that's interfering with successful adaptation and successful relationships? So children know that if they act out, they'll get attention, and getting some attention is better than no attention at all. If they bully others, our research shows that they get a lot of attention from their peers. So what is it that they need support in? And as we analyze the needs and strengths of children, it enables us to scaffold. And this is a term that Jerome Bruno, and it really means coaching and providing structures so the child can successfully engage at a level that's a little bit higher than the level they'd naturally be able to do. And with practice, then they can develop that. And Leena, you were telling me that in the SNAP program, it's really the role playing that helps. So you scaffold, you give the children skills, ways to calm themselves down, ways to think about their problems, ways to plan what they're going to do. And it's this scaffolding that enables them to acquire the skills, especially if they practice again and again and again. So scaffolding is a really important strategy when we're thinking about promoting healthy development for children and youth. We're going to switch now just to think about the relationship perspective. And if you stop to think about it, it's what happens in relationships that makes a difference for children. When we say, well, it's what happens in the family, it's what happens in the peer group, the school, the community. But when you take it all down and you think about it carefully, what really makes a difference is what happens for that child in the moment. So if a teacher uses a harsh word or calls that child a name, that's the impact. That's what impacts the child, rather than the teacher's general approach to the whole class. It's what happens in the moment. And I've been thinking this through in terms of neighborhoods, because we often think about, well, risky neighborhoods place children at risk, and they do. There's absolutely no question. But what is it about that risky neighborhood? And Leena, I think you captured it with your quote that you can't unsee what you've seen, and you can't unhear what you've heard. So that what you see and what you hear happens in the moment. And that's why relationships are so important, because they not only create the context for development, but they impact the child positively or negatively, and lay down patterns of behaviors and understanding for that child. And Dawn, I was back in Dawn Meichenbaum's writing this morning about therapeutic relationships, because I was looking at changes in attachment for teens who are going through treatment. And what we do know, and Dawn's written about this so cogently, is that the quality of the therapeutic relationship is the best predictor of outcome of treatment, regardless of what form of treatment. That you need to have a caring, nurturing, positive relationship with the therapist in order to risk and make the changes that are required for treatment. So I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, and you can see that's why this person is incredible. It's all about relationships.
I think it is.
And I'm very blessed to have your relationship. So what we're going to go into is, we thought it'd be important to share an example, and I'm very honored to be able to share this with permission that I have from Public Safety Canada. It is a fictitious but prototypical case called Tyler, and it's one young man's troubled path towards a life of crime. So I'm going to walk you through, and in this, I'm going to share with this, and I've shared this before, but I think it's really important to share this again. You're going to see a life event, you're going to see the risk factor and the associated costs with that. So really what we know is Tyler's mother gets pregnant at age 17, the risk factor, she's a young mom. Tyler's father had a history of crime, so there's criminal family member. Father gets arrested, so you can see the impact on the home. Child welfare gets involved, must attend childcare and home visits. And you can see at the tender age of just 2, the associated cost is around $34,800, and this was back in 2016. So here you continue on. Now he's 3 to 5. He has no friends. He's at daycare. He's hitting other children. So you can see early conduct problems, aggressive behavior. He's kicked out of daycare. He stays home with his father, who tends to ignore him. So now you have poor parental monitoring, child rearing practices. Father breaks Tyler's arm in a fit of rage. So you can see violence happening here. So we have authoritarian parenting, low parental empathy. He is now placed in foster care. So his involvement with foster care. And just at this tender age of 5, we're up to $108,000. So you continue down this path. He's now in 3 different foster homes, abusive with family. He can't adjust. You can see the risk factors, adjustment problems, hyperactivity, frequent family transitions. Again, it's what Deb is talking about, relationships. Struggles in school. He's diagnosed with ADHD and a learning disability. Attention problems, poor academic achievement. He's getting into a lot of fights at school, shows no remorse. So he's issues with his peers. He lacks responsibility. And you can see at the age of 10, we're up to $382,000. And so as we continue, 11 to 14, now he's befriending kids who are getting into trouble. He's starting to steal and buy alcohol, marijuana. You can see there's substance abuse and alcohol and antisocial peers. He's caught and charged with break and enter and theft. And now we're up to $574,000. As he progresses into his later teens, he's rarely attending school. He has no regard for it. He's disrespectful to teachers and students, psychosocial immaturity. You can see more alcohol and drug use. He's arrested for assault and he's sent to a detention center, and he starts to begin to learn the drug trade in detention. And we're up to almost close to $1 million, which is $902,000. So now 18 and plus, he's in adult court, receives an 18-month sentence in jail for drug trafficking, starts to have a criminal history of drugs, relationship difficulty. He gets his girlfriend pregnant, so the cycle repeats itself. He assaults her and he receives a 5-year sentence. So you can see what we were trying to demonstrate from this is the life events, the risk factors, and how gender-based violence gets perpetuated. 1.5 million. And the research shows it can cost up to 6.5 million for one serious violent and chronic offender. So a lot of risk factors. We know there are gender-based risk and protective factors, things like individual risk factors, aggression or delinquent behavior as a child or youth, anger and hostility, antisocial personality traits and conduct problems, lack of nonviolent social problem-solving skills, belief in strict gender roles, attitudes accepting or justifying violence and aggression, and regarding relationship, unhealthy family relationships and interactions, which we've been stressing here, association with antisocial and aggressive peers, and really a history of poor parenting is what we're seeing. But then there are some protective factors that we need to be thinking about, we need to be building on. We talk about risk identification management, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. Really strong social supports are important, and community factors, as Deb said. Communities with access to mental health services and coordination of resources and services among community agencies. So I'm going to push it over to Deb because I really want her to focus on our understanding of the bullying piece, because I think this comes into a clear role of that.
Great, thanks so much, Leena. So when we're looking at how interpersonal violence in adulthood develops, it's really helpful to look at what's happening much earlier than that, because we know what later behavior is, what comes before. And you know, it wasn't until the 80s that anybody started looking at bullying in any serious way. And Dan Olweus and others in Scandinavia started to look at it. But the important thing to think about with bullying is that it's a relationship dynamic in which one individual has power over another individual and uses that power aggressively. And really, that's what we're talking about in terms of interpersonal violence. So those who bully are in a position of power relative to those who are victimized. And when we think about power, it's not just being bigger or stronger or older or smarter. It comes from things that are really subtle. It comes from social status that we may not see. It comes from knowing something about another's vulnerabilities or sensitivities. And it manifests itself in a lot of different ways, not just bigger, stronger. So we have to think about it in terms of its complexity. And as bullying unfolds over time within a given relationship between two children, between a boyfriend to girlfriend, or two boyfriends or two girlfriends, the power differential in the relationship becomes increasingly consolidated. So the person who's being victimized loses power in that relationship unless there's some mechanism that stops the violence and the interpersonal aggression, the power over aggression. So when we think about it, we can think about it in terms of a developmental trajectory of power and aggression. And this is what we've been sort of thinking about and what our research helps us understand. So bullying is a form of aggression. There are many, many different types of children and youth who bully. Some are very controlled and very popular. Others are the uncontrolled, like the children that your SNAP program deals with, Leena. But what we know is that the children, the youth who bully move into dating aggression. David Farrington's research shows they move into marital abuse and child abuse. Their children become those who do the bullying. So it's that intergenerational cycle. The children who bully engage in gang aggression, sexual harassment, and workplace harassment. So I'm going to show you some of our data to give you an understanding of how this developmental pathway unfolds. So when we think about bullying in adolescence, what do you have power over another? Well, in adolescence, of course, the youth are going through puberty. They're figuring out their sexual identity, their whole sexuality. So sexual harassment and dating aggression emerge from this power over dynamic. And so the behavioral use of power and aggression to control somebody or to distress another seems to transfer to sexual harassment and dating aggression and relationship problems across the lifespan. So we had a study with longitudinal data. We followed children from grades 4 and 5 through the end of high school. And we had a sample of about 700 youth, and we were able to follow them, gathering data every year. And we're able then, with the help of Depeng Zhang, who's this amazing statistician that Leena and I both learned from, we're able to look at the progression of these behaviors. So when we look at the links between bullying and dating aggression, because that's what helps us figure out who's at risk, we looked at physical dating aggression. We measured that and we assessed it with 5 items. So whether the individual reported they'd slapped or kicked, choked, punched, beaten, pushed, grabbed, shoved, threw, smashed, or kicked an object, or hit or tried to hit with something. So if we look at the trajectories of girls and boys bullying, we've got them here, and you can see that there's a group of girls and boys who bullying too much when they're 10, but they start to increase in bullying and continue in bullying through to 17. Those are represented with the blue line at the top of the graphs. The pink line represents another group of youth who start about exactly the same place, but by the end of high school, they've figured out that this isn't such a great way to be in relationships. So they're desisting in that. And there's another group who engages moderately. They're not doing too much when they're 10 and 11 years old, but they increase in bullying across the adolescent years. And then fortunately, there's a large group of students who never engage in bullying. But with these data, we've been able to pull out the sort of that binocular vision and look at both developmental risk factors and relationship risk factors. So we look at the children who are involved in high and moderate bullying and compare those to the youth who aren't engaged or engaged at quite low levels. And we can see the developmental risk factors, the children who are disengaged morally, which means they don't really have empathy or concern for the other. They think that the other deserves aggression. Those are the youth who engage in bullying. Those who are physically aggressive and relationally aggressive with their peers. When we look at relationship risk factors, and Leena, this goes back to what you were talking about, these youth have low trust with their parents and low parental monitoring, which is really an index of how much the youth communicate with their parents and tell them where they are and what they're doing. It's not how great the parents are. It's really about the quality of the youth relationships. They have high conflict with their parents. And just like you said, like that Tyler example, they end up associating with peers who are similarly aggressive, similarly bullying, because those are the peers who are at the edges of the social group. They have a lot of conflict with their peers, and they're very susceptible to peer pressure. So when peers say, let's go and, shoplift, let's skip school, let's do drugs, these kids are first in and going along ready to be accepted. When we flip the coin, we also find that there are 4 groups of youth who are victimized. And the blue line represents a group of youth who are highly victimized, and you can see it just persists across high school, and boys report more victimization than girls by and large. There's also a group that starts in pink and desists, and a group who engages moderately, and finally the group who's not victimized and protected from that kind of really abusive peer interaction.
And it's interesting, Deb, because I would have thought it would have been a flip, that girls would feel more victimized, higher victimization throughout the teen years.
Well, it's interesting because when you ask both girls and boys, which is worse, relational aggression, being your relationships being damaged through bullying, or physical aggression. Both boys and girls say the relational aggression is more. So they may report less, but the impact, girls are more likely to do relational aggression than boys.
Right.
The impact of that is probably more severe. So when we look again through the binoculars and look at the developmental risk factors, the girls who are highly victimized have high anxiety, they have high depression and eating problems. So that whole constellation of internalizing problems, it puts them at risk, girls and boys at risk for victimization through late elementary and high school. When we look at the relationship risk factors, again, the relationship with parents and peers is really strained. So they don't have a good communication relationship with their parents. They have high conflict with their parents, low trust with their parents. Again, high conflict with their peers. And these youth are also susceptible to peer pressure, because one way to get accepted and feel like you're part of the group is to go along with deviant behaviors. So then let's turn to dating aggression and look at the trajectories as well. Here we find that there are 3 different pathways. There's an early starter pathway that the girls and boys engage in bullying, and then in dating aggression rather, and then decrease. There's also an increasing group that isn't doing much at 10, at 12 and 13 and 14 and these are all students who report having a romantic relationship, having a partner, but it increases through 16 and 17 and stays fairly consistent over those latter years. And again, if we look at the risk factors for who is it that's getting involved in dating aggression, it differs a little bit for girls and boys. For girls, it's those girls who engage in high or moderate bullying. It's girls who are aggressive to other girls, who are aggressive toward their dating partners. It's girls who have a poor relationship and poor communication with their parents that's assessed through parental monitoring. And the questions of that generally ask, like, do your parents know where you are? Do they think they know? Do they really know? How much do you talk to your parents? How much do you share? How much do you engage? And there's reciprocity in dating aggression. So for girls, being victimized by their boyfriend is a risk factor for them being aggressive. And so there's a dynamic in the relationship that's important to consider. For boys, the boys who bully at a high rate are likely to be physically aggressive, as you remember, that's what we're measuring, toward their girlfriends. And early in elementary school, we find those boys had been aggressive to girls. So it's pretty unusual for boys to be aggressive toward girls, but in elementary school, that's a risk factor. That's a signal that we should be paying attention. They also have weak parental monitoring, and they're likely to be in an aggressive relationship if they're hit by their girlfriends. So one last slide. If none of these risk factors are present, the probability that a youth will engage in physical aggression with their dating partner is almost nothing. It's lower than 3%. But if all of these risk factors are present, the risk of those youth engaging in aggression with the dating partner is over 99%. So we could identify who those children are with a high probability and intervene quickly rather than waiting until adulthood, when the impact is so significant on both adult as well as the children who live with the adults. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deb. So you can see complex, extremely interesting, but complex, and really a need to look at this important issue of bullying as well, because it's a ramification of the gender-based violence.
And
right?
it's the relationship dynamic. Yeah.
So again, 7 years of warning, 7-year incubation period. And I just recently did a presentation at a university, and one of the students said this was the stat or the fact that really resonated with her. It wasn't so much the 7 years of warning, but the 7-year incubation period, which I kind of added, because I feel you're incubating.
Yeah.
You are incubating. This was part of a study group I was very honored to be part of with Doctors Rolf Lober and David Farrington. And it was a study group on what they call child delinquents and how do we catch these kids early. And so what they found is the fact we cannot ignore is there's this strong evidence that indicates there were 7 years. So 7 years of warning before a juvenile becomes a serious, violent, and chronic offender. So kids who, let me go backwards, kids who end up in court at the age of 14 and a half for committing a serious violent offense, if you go back into their records, any kindergarten teacher can tell you, I am concerned about the 6-year-old or 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Right? And so what we need to think about, and what they're probably displaying at their very young age, is a little bit of disruptive behavior, aggression, noncompliance. And it starts to escalate to more moderate serious behavior problems at around age 9.5, like theft and shoplifting. And just before their 12th birthday, they commit their first serious delinquent offense. And at 14 and a half, they're at court. 7 years of warning, 7-year incubation period. And that's why we talk about why we really need to pay attention. Early intervention, catch them early, is the middle years.
If I can just jump in, Leena, what's so interesting about 14.5 is it's the peak for the onset throughout the lifespan. It's the peak for the onset of mental health disorders. Right. So something is happening at this age that places some children and youth really at risk. We probably know who those kids are as well, and they're probably a big overlap.
You're absolutely right. And even our criminal record study that we're doing with regards to SNAP children, we're finding that peak age is that. It's 14. Something is going on developmentally, so we need more research.
And we need to catch them before 14,
right,
and be sure that we're supporting them.
So they're not flipping into the juvenile justice system. But really critical is that also mental health piece that we need to be thinking about. And why we're focusing a little bit more on emotion regulation, self-control, there's lots of things to focus on, but why we're grasping at that more is that, we know that, this is a funny thing. I keep saying the brain is plastic. I think plastic is hard, isn't it? And so I want to say the brain is malleable, right? Flexible, and can change and grow throughout the life. But it gets harder as we get older. You can see the brain's ability to change in response to experiences gets lower and lower, and the amount of effort gets harder and harder. But what they're finding, all these great researchers like Dr. Alex Picaro and others who are studying emotion regulation and self-control, that somehow this is the sweet spot. Under the age of 12 is really the best time to really help these kids learn how to control their thoughts, feelings, and actions. And that's why it's important. It doesn't mean that it can't continue to change. And this is an article by Vital City, and this is Dr. Alex Picaro, who says he put his money on it to prevent crime, respect the role of self-control. And he says to improve many other outcomes throughout life than to build up self-control of individuals, because he really says there's a strong relationship in regards to delinquency and criminal behavior, as well as victimization, which we just talked about, right? And so self-control is predictive of health and wealth and other aspects of society. And really, we must understand how to effectively socialize our kids to have better self-control and also help others to also improve their self-control. So just wanted to do that. What we're going to go now into is we're going to go into examples of programs. And we would love to have shared more and more of these programs, but given time, we are going to highlight 2 with Naomi and Lisa. But before we get to them, we want to highlight 2 others just really quickly. So the first one is, you heard about us talking briefly about SNAP. So SNAP stands for Stop Now and Plan. It is about helping children to increase their self-control, including emotion regulation and self-control and problem solving. It's really about how to make better choices in the moment, how to stop and think before they act and make better choices in the moment. And what we have found, 40 years of working with these vulnerable children, up to 90% of children report their antisocial behaviors. Up to 90% of children experience poor self-control. 70% of children experience maladaptive parenting styles. 33% children experience disruption in care. Really kind of confirming what we've been talking about. The majority of these children have also experienced trauma or witnessed, for example, family violence or witnessed violence at some rate and have negative peer relationships. Not all of them. We just want to be very clear. Also, we know that SNAP girls have high rates of unhealthy caregiver-child relationships and parental mental health, which we talked about, and problems with sexual behavior. We also see that SNAP boys have high rates of antisocial behavior and academic underperformance. In the SNAP model, there are three different programs. The evidence-based one is the SNAP Boys and Girls, or they call SNAP Clinical. It is a specialized gender-sensitive clinical program for kids 6 to 11 and their caregivers. It's a multifaceted program. We work with the child, we work with the parents or the caregivers. We conduct SNAP groups for both of them, but we also work with their schools, we work with their community, we do individual counseling and advocacy. We also, as a result of this program, in 2004, and this program is 39 years old, and it started when Canada raised the age of criminal responsibility from 7 to 12. So in 2004, the teachers and educators were saying, well, why can't we have that strategy in our classroom? And so that's when we embarked on developing a SNAP for schools, which is a universal prevention program. And that is, again, for elementary school age children. It is a digitized program where we train educators and school personnel to deliver that program. In 2012, probation, I had a number of meetings with probation in Ontario, for example, and in Canada, and they were saying, well, could that program not work for kids already involved in the justice system, whether it's custody, probation, or community programming? And so we embarked on developing a SNAP for Youth, or a SNAP Youth Justice model, and that one is for youth aged 12 to 18 already involved in youth justice pieces, and it is also a digitized program. The program is showing some incredible results and findings. For example, the neuroscience studies, which you were involved in, Deb, with University of Toronto and sick kids, where they actually saw, you can see that when they come into the SNAP program, they're really not processing from that executive functioning area, right? I call it the lizard brain, right? And then you can see in just 13 weeks, you could see some deactivation in that lizard part of the brain and some activation in what I call the wizard brain. And what Dr. Nathan Kola did just recently in 2022, published that study, he actually found that improvements in behavioral measures of impulsivity and which was associated with structural changes in the frontal parts of the brain known to be linked to self-control. So how cool is that?
That's great. You know, I talked to a neuroscientist after we did this, Thomas Paus, and he said, Deb, what it really is that they're laying down the neural pathways from the executive functioning area of the brain to the emotional functioning so they can down-regulate. So this, I'm not surprised by this structural change because it's those developing neural pathways.
Exactly. It is amazing. And so really, again, it's about practice, practice, practice. The role playing is critical. You watch someone do a role play, you do it yourself, you watch yourself because it's videotaped, you get feedback not only from the facilitator, but the kids participating in the program. So really cool. What they also found is that, you know, we know that poor self-control, we heard it from the Alex Picaro and that piece, but really SNAP is proven to increase self-control and improved life outcomes for children. And the research supporting, which through randomized control trials, which are what we call gold standard, document improvements in self-control and reducing externalizing behaviors. And for every dollar you spend on SNAP, you save around 32 up to 56. And there's an 86% likelihood benefits outweigh costs. So a lot of great things that are decreasing aggression and role breaking and externalizing problems, but increasing self-control and positive relationships. And lastly, I just want to share, because of its robust outcome, SNAP has received numerous designations and awards. So the next program I'd love to highlight is a program that's being developed and piloted and tested at the Florida Network of Youth and Family Services. This is an incredibly excellent organization in the state of Florida, and they are launching, you know, programs right across the state. So this is a program called FATHER, which stands for Fathers Advancing Towards Healthy and Effective Relationships. And I believe we have Che Latchford, who is an incredible colleague of ours, who is with us today as well. And he might be able to address any questions we have about that. But let me go through what they sent me. So the Florida Network is a not-for-profit statewide association. They fund, support, and monitor the delivery of prevention and early intervention services as defined by the Florida statute. They also have emergency shelters, temporary stabilizing placements available 24 hours a day, 365 days a week for youth aged 10 to 17. Which is a hard age, right? Very hard age. So thank you for doing that. Community counseling, providing a variety of effective services and strategies to increase child skill development and caregiver involvement of youth aged 6 to 17. And how they do it is support 27. They support 27 local network programs to meet the unique needs of their communities. How great is that? You talk about this, you talk about networks. This is so critical. And why they do it is a 9 to 19 return for each dollar invested in prevention services for Florida's most vulnerable youth and families. So that's another payoff and benefit. So the Father Program overview is funded by the Department of Children and Families. Thank you, DCF, for doing that. The overarching goal is to enhance the relationships between Florida's fathers. So that's why we're going to bring the fathers in here, because I believe Lisa and Naomi are focusing more on moms. So thank you. This is really focusing on dads, increase child and family stability and well-being, and halt the intergenerational transmission, which is what we've been talking about, of adverse child experiences, child welfare, and justice system involvement. And the eligibility are fathers with children 17 and younger, recipients of food or reemployment assistance, previously incarcerated or incarcerated fathers, and they could be for different reasons. Residents in one of Florida's 427 opportunity zones, which are really economically distressed communities, which are really important. And fathers participating in batters intervention programs or involved with child protection. So that's why I really wanted to highlight this. I think this is a really interesting new innovation that they are piloting and testing in a number of communities. I just want to make sure I didn't lose anything. So the last slide on this is really about, they do good case management services. They needs assessment with goal setting, individual support and system navigation, identification, and connecting to local resources. They also provide the SNAP services because the Florida network is implementing SNAP statewide, individualized treatment planning, and a 13-week SNAP Stop Now and Plan group for the caregiver and the child. They also have statewide availability. They're working with 6 partner agencies. You can see there's Anchorage Children's Home, Family Resource, Lutheran Services of Florida Southwest, Seminole County Sheriff's Office, Prevention Central, and Youth Crisis Center, WISE. What I really think is really cool about the Florida Network too is that they are actually getting Seminole County Sheriff's Office. I have seen them do incredible role plays and be able to get the kids to co-regulate and self-regulate, which is unbelievable. They're also available in 9 counties, the Bay, Clay, Duval, Seminole, Pinellas, I think, yep, Manatee, Lee, Charlotte, and Bullard. So excellent program, which we just wanted to share and highlight for you. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I do have one question for Che, which we're going to get to, but let's get to the next one where we have our guest, and I'll introduce you to her. This guest is Lisa Sura. She is a research social worker, registered social worker, is a senior clinical program lead at the Child Development Institute, an accredited child and youth mental health agency in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Lisa has over 20 years of experience in developing and implementing innovative interventions and gender-based violence sectors. Lisa is the co-creator and clinical lead of Mothers in Mind. We call it MIM. For short, a trauma-informed mother-child group program specifically designed to meet the parent needs of mothers who have experienced interpersonal trauma and have children under the age of 4. And what we really found out, which is very cool, is we found out that Lisa was actually one of Deb's students who helped with the initial bullying observations, which were how many years? Like 30, 40 years, 30 something years ago.
Yeah, early 90s.
How cool is that? Hi, Lisa. Welcome, Lisa.
Okay. Thanks so much for the lovely introduction, Leena. And nice to see you again, Dr. Pepler. That's very exciting to see you. So I'm just here to talk to you about Mothers in Mind. Leena gave a bit of a kind of snapshot view of what Mothers in Mind is. Next slide, please. So just to give some context, Mothers in Mind was developed at Child Development Institute, which is a children's mental health agency in Toronto. You'll see on the slide the various streams of service that we have at CDI. Mothers in Mind was developed in our family violence services stream, which is like a really interesting kind of cross between gender-based violence services and children's mental health. And we developed Mothers in Mind because we were noticing a huge gap in service. We were running a program that was for children who've been exposed to intimate partner violence in their homes, for kids aged 4 to 18 and their mothers. And we had infants and toddlers coming to our agency, but they were in childcare. They weren't receiving any service. So we started looking at how could we develop a program that supported infants and toddlers, because we know they are certainly greatly at risk due to their developmental vulnerability, and also the fact that they are, heavily reliant on their caregivers and around their caregivers so often. So we looked at how to explore developing a program specifically for moms and their little ones. Next slide, please. And you can pass it forward. Thank you. So Mothers in Mind is a trauma-informed therapeutic mother-child group program. And it's specific for moms who've experienced relational trauma, often intimate partner violence, but also for moms who've experienced childhood abuse and neglect when they were growing up. And it's for moms who are parenting little ones. And we're really looking at the impact of trauma on parenting. We're looking at that impact of trauma on the mother-child relationship and how mom feels about being a mother. And when thinking, I often try and kind of give an example when thinking about that impact of trauma. So if you think developmentally, the stage that we're working with, tantrums are a really typical, expected part of development. And they're not easy. Most parents find the tantruming stage really, really difficult. It's hard to know how to respond, what's the most helpful thing for children at that age. And they're also difficult. If you think about what happens in a tantrum, we have little ones who are struggling with big feelings and they're showing it in their behavior. So you may hear yelling, you may hear screaming, there could be kicking, that kind of thing. So a difficult experience for all parents, but think about it if you've had relational trauma. So if you have had hurtful things happen in relationships with others, that moment that is expected for the developmental stage might feel different for you as a parent. You might feel triggered in that moment when your child is having a tantrum, because it may remind you of the abuse that you had experienced in your past. We are asking moms and hoping that moms are able to respond to the needs of their child in that moment, but they actually may be afraid of their child. So Mothers in Mind is a place where moms can come with their kids in a really playful, supportive environment and be able to have these more complex, nuanced conversations around parenting about how that trauma sometimes can kind of really get in there in the mother-child relationship. Next slide, please. We are focused in MIM on strengthening the mother-child relationship after trauma, and we're kind of looking at two big things. So we're looking at, first and foremost, mom's well-being. We know that when moms are doing better and have the resources to kind of manage life's up and downs, that they are more available to their children. So Mothers in Mind is a group where all the moms in the group have experienced hurtful things in their relationship, often intimate partner violence or other forms of relational trauma. And so there is a knowing and a connection that all the moms have experienced something similar. And that can help with a reduction in feelings of shame and guilt, knowing this didn't just happen to you, that this has happened to other moms. In the program, we're heavily focused on strengthening mom's own self-care and self-compassion. What are the thoughts that are happening in her head? Are they helpful thoughts to her? How are they kind of reinforcing maybe possibly some of the experiences and abuses that she has experienced in her life? Does she have that thought pattern going on in her head that's not helping her during her parenting and in other parts of her life? So really looking at self-compassion there, and managing stress, managing emotions, anger, frustration, so they are less likely to kind of get in the way of the mother-child relationship. So we are really heavily focused on mom's well-being, and then we are looking at mom's sensitivity and responsiveness and helping her kind of strengthen and build that, because we know that that's what's really helpful for young children, especially when they've experienced chronic stress in their own life. So we have conversations and have parenting information that is trauma informed to maybe help mom look at something a little bit differently. We also have focus on building mom's confidence in her parenting through looking at what she's already really doing well in the parenting relationship and building on that.
After everything that happened to us, I didn't know what to do or how to help my child. Everything felt hard. Then my worker told me about Mothers in Mind. I was scared, thought people would judge us, not get what we've been through. It was hard to go that first day. I was nervous. But once I got there, I couldn't believe it. The moms, they're just like me. We've all been through some hard stuff. They get it. Every week, my child was excited to sing and play with their new friends. We got to connect too, and being with the other moms who have gone through similar stuff felt really good. We shared stories, we laughed, we learned from and supported each other. The facilitators, they were awesome. They made us feel comfortable, connected, helped us see all the strengths we have as moms. Those one-on-ones, wow, helped me figure out how to stay calm so I could comfort my child when they're having a hard time. You can't imagine how great that feels. We don't always get it right as moms, but I learned that reconnecting with my child after a hard moment helps us both feel better. Because of Mothers in Mind, there's this feeling of hope, like a comfort in knowing that I can continue to help my child grow up healthy and that there are people who care about us and are here to help. Seriously, I'm so glad I joined Mothers in Mind. You should think about it. It really helped.
This was a video that was designed to give moms a sense of what it feels like to be in Mothers in Mind. You'll notice by the images that if you were to look at Mothers in Mind from the outside and you didn't hear any of the words that were happening, any of the discussions that were happening, it would look like every other mother-child playgroup out there. You see moms and kids on the floor, there are toys, lots of singing, mothers feeding her child, that sort of thing. So from the outside, looking in, it looks like every other mother-child playgroup. Where it's different is these conversations that we're having around that impact of trauma. And when looking at what makes Mothers in Mind kind of different from some of the other amazing parenting programs that are out there, is this combination of a playgroup, a mother-child playgroup, mother-child dyadic work, and then individual parenting support. So within the playgroup, moms and kids are together the whole time. It is focused on play, and we're having kind of supportive discussions with moms and their kids in the room. It's a really small group, so we have maximum 6 moms with their kids under the age of 4, and 2 facilitators within that group. And we do that specifically so we can focus on each mother-child pair within the group. Moms get the opportunity to connect with other moms within this group format, but they can also get attention to their unique mother-child relationship strengths and needs. We're really focused on helping moms build on these strengths and supporting moms in the moment in the group. So if you think about the tantrum that I discussed earlier, that kind of looks at that impact of trauma, if that happens in group, There's a facilitator there to help mom and child and really kind of work through looking at what's going on for mom in that moment and helping her identify what's happening when her child's having a tantrum. And eventually moving towards looking at what does her child need right now from her, and what would that look like? How might she approach her child to support them in a sensitively responsive way? And where appropriate, support around repair, relational repair between moms and their little ones when hard moments happen. And hard moments happen in all mother-child relationships. So there's that uniqueness around the play group, and then the attention to the individual needs of each mother-child relationship within the group. And then outside of group, moms are offered the opportunity to have parenting support one-on-one. And this can be in person. This can also be weekly phone calls where workers are able to kind of dig in a little bit more with moms around their parenting goals, and their specific needs around strategies and what might be helpful at home. Next slide, please. We have 3 different kind of models of Mothers in Mind. The original model is the Mothers in Mind community model that was developed back in 2005. It's a 10-week program, and it's for moms who identify having relational trauma. They can be referred by any agency within, any of the services that make sense for mom. Mom can also be self-referred to that program, and the program runs in community mental health centers or other agencies that do this kind of work. We have sites that are running Mothers in Mind in Ontario and also in Australia, who have been running Mothers in Mind for a number of years. Once we developed the community version, we noticed kind of a need. So we at CDI have a number of shelters that we partner with and provide services for moms and kids who've experienced violence. And what we were finding is that the community version wasn't really working for moms who were currently living in shelter. They had a lot of things that they were managing at the time, and committing to a 10-week program didn't really work. But they could benefit from some support because there have been so many transitions in their life when moving into shelter and in the lives of their children. So we developed a shelter drop-in program where it's highly accessible. The facilitators come to the shelter. It's typically run in 6-week blocks. Moms can come when they want and kind of pick up pieces of information that would be beneficial to them at the time. It often is also kind of an entryway into, once mom settles out of the shelter and has moved out of the shelter, they may come back to attend the community Mothers in Mind group once they're settled. And then more recently, we've developed the Mothers in Mind Child Protection Collaboration Model, which is kind of a cross-sector community mental health and child protection, running Mothers in Mind together for mothers who are currently involved with child protection services. So they have an open file due to experiences of intimate partner violence, and they have a little one. And that work we're doing together. So community facilitators along with a child protection facilitator. And the focus is on supporting kind of a circle of care around moms who are managing the complexities of experiences of trauma, parenting little ones, and ongoing child protection involvement. And the hope and the focus of that is that moms have the opportunity, if they choose to meet with their child protection worker and the Mothers in Mind team to share some of their growth and shifts within their parenting, in a hope that it helps move their child protection service plan along. And so we developed that in partnership with the Children's Aid Society of Toronto back starting in 2016. And it's now kind of as part of a larger project that is expanding in sites in Ontario and Manitoba in Canada. Next slide, please. Great. So we thought we'd kind of end a little bit talking a little bit about the evaluation for Mothers in Mind. Evaluation's always been a big part of Mothers in Mind since its inception ages ago. We have been involved in two major projects. So one is the Safe and Understood project that looked at, it was quite a large 5-year study that was looking at two programs, Mothers in Mind and Caring Dads, which is a program for dads who have perpetrated abuse. And they were looking at improving outcomes for young children who have experienced intimate partner violence and were involved with child protection. And what we found, just like some of the highlights from the evaluation of the Safe and Understood project in relation to in Mothers in Mind, is that we found a significant increase in parenting self-efficacy, that parenting confidence. Mothers believed that they improved after attending Mothers in Mind. They were more affectionate, empathetic, and understanding towards their children. There were significant increases in parenting knowledge of children's social and young children's social and emotional needs after attending MIM. And that really helps with kind of developmental expectations or appropriateness of their expectations of their children and positive discipline approaches. And an interesting finding that we also found a significant decrease in parenting depression and anxiety, which is not a goal of Mothers in Mind, but an interesting thing to note that had moms reported feeling less anxious and depressed after attending Mothers in Mind. And overall, we were also looking at adherence to trauma-informed practice. So was the programming happening and adhering to best practice when it comes to trauma-informed care? And we did find that in all of the areas of agency and respect, opportunities for connection, strengths-based practice, and parent support and cultural responsivity, that we were in full adherence of trauma-informed practice. And there is an article out by Angelique Jenny and Associates who have written on that study. We're currently now involved in another 5-year study, and kind of right in the middle of it right now, the Safe at Home project, that is looking at this expansion of the child protection version of Mothers in Mind in sites in Ontario and Manitoba. We're really early on in the collection of our data, but you can see we've integrated a new measure, the Interpersonal Mindfulness and Parenting Scale. And these are our super early results, but what we're finding is that moms are reporting an increase in mindfulness in their parenting practices, this non-judgmental acceptance of self and child, that self-compassion is looking really great, compassion for self and child, self-regulation in the parenting relationship, and kind of overall mindfulness. So we're really excited about these very early findings and look forward to kind of reporting back down the road. And I just thought I would end with a few quotes of what moms are saying regarding their experiences in Mothers in Mind. I'm able to take a breath and manage my feelings better than originally, so I can put my child first, even when I get upset. I learned different ways to manage my children's temperament and challenging feelings. I learned grace and patience with myself and challenges with children when they arise. And yes, we're much closer now. I notice she always wants me all the time, which that one is interesting to me because I think it really helped mom see her daughter's behavior differently and was able to kind of make that connection to, oh, my child really likes and enjoys being with me, which is a wonderful result for that mom. So thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to an overview of Mothers in Mind, and I think we're passing it on to Dr. Naomi Andrews.
Great. Oh,
There we go.
Okay, thanks so much, Lisa. And what a joy it is for me to welcome you, Naomi. Naomi is currently an associate professor in the Department of Child and Youth Studies at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario. Naomi did her PhD in Arizona, and so we're so lucky that she came back to Canada and is now working here. Naomi was a postdoctoral fellow with Breaking the Cycle, so we worked together for years before you headed off to Brock to make a difference. Naomi's research is really focused on relationships. She looks at at relationships within the family context, but also relationships in the peer context, and looking at how relationships contribute to problem behavior through a relational perspective to understand the development of interpersonal violence, child maltreatment, and conduct problems. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Naomi, to talk about the Connections program.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Deb and Leena. Thank you for having me here today. So like Deb mentioned, what I want to talk a little bit about today is an initiative that I worked with Deb and with others at Out of Mothercraft and Breaking the Cycle in Toronto. And it's an initiative called Building Connections, which is a large-scale, multi-year, community-based research and evaluation initiative. The whole thing built around an intervention that's focused on interpersonal violence for mothers. So we can go to the next slide. So this is the intervention itself. It's a manualized 6-week intervention designed for mothers who have experienced violence in relationships. It's split into these 6 weeks or 6 topics that really starts with just focusing on an understanding of what interpersonal violence is and what an unhealthy relationship might look like, and also really importantly, what a healthy relationship looks like. We know that many of the mothers who attend this intervention may have had very few experiences or very few models of healthy relationships. So really starting off with that foundation of what does a healthy relationship even look like? How can we even conceptualize that? The intervention then links to that intergenerational piece. So asking mothers to reflect back on how their experiences as children, their experiences perhaps with unhealthy parents or in unhealthy households, how that may have contributed to how they engage in relationships today. We then start moving forward in thinking about what changes do moms want to make. Then the next section kind of shifts the focus into their children. So first talking about child development, really thinking through these issues of how witnessing violence or being around interpersonal violence can impact the child and the child's developing brain. And then again, moving forward with a focus here on how we can build self-esteem or build self-compassion, and then into parenting, how we can support the child's self-esteem as well. So we move to the next slide. So the Building Connections initiative is this larger phased approach with this connections intervention really at its center. So I won't go through this in a ton of detail, but just to kind of walk through how this initiative takes place, because it really involves working with and partnering with other community-based projects across Canada. So other community projects that are often early child centers or parenting centers or community mental health centers, things like that. So the initiative started with a process of building knowledge and awareness in terms of interpersonal violence and a trauma-informed approach to care more broadly. It then involved establishing interest in kind of further and more intensive training around interpersonal violence and engaging and partnering with these community-based projects. We engaged in a really purposeful process of understanding and assessing readiness, and I'll come back to that a little bit at the end about the importance of thinking about readiness. We then brought service providers in for certified training on the Connections intervention. After those service providers were trained to facilitate connections, they returned to their home communities and started running the Connections group. So delivering connections where we, again, worked with them in continued relationship to provide ongoing support, as well as engage in the research and evaluation component of the initiative. So if we really distill down to the critical components of this work and what made this initiative work, it's really these 3 pieces, that it's trauma-informed, relational, and community-based. So when we think about a trauma-informed approach, we're really thinking here about safety across all levels, and building in layers of safety at, not only for the individual, for the mother who's going to attend the connections group, but also for those service providers who are facilitating the group, for the project, for the agency, and even the community. And then also considering safety in terms of the research and evaluation, right? Really thinking through how this research component and how being able to understand the impact of this initiative is going to impact those that are involved in well. So really deliberately embedding safety across all of these levels. We also take a relational approach, as we've kind of talked a lot about today. But here, really consciously and again deliberately focusing on forming and supporting positive relationships. And for us, that really starts internally, right? It starts with our team and thinking about and highlighting and supporting relationships among the members of our team, between our team and our community partners, thinking about relationships within and across those community partners, and then again, even more broadly at the community and systems level. So using these frameworks, we engaged in this process of partnering with community-based projects across Canada. So in this initiative, we partnered with 32 projects across Canada. You can kind of see where they are on the map. And over the course of several years, those trained facilitators then delivered the connections group in their home communities. So we ended up with 26 community-based projects running the connections group, with just over 300 women attending the connections intervention and just about 250 completing. So an 80% completion rate for the women who were involved in the connections intervention. So I wanted to highlight a few key findings in terms of our evaluation and what we learned from this initiative, both in terms of what the facilitators said about the impact of the initiative for them, and then with what some of the mothers said as well. So when we think about what the impact of this initiative was for facilitators, they talked about changes for themselves in terms of their awareness, competency, collaboration, and safety. And they also talked about changes both for themselves as individuals, as service providers and facilitators, as well as changes for their organizations and changes that they saw in their communities. So I'll go through and talk through a few quotes to give you a sense of, using the words of the facilitators who were involved, some of the things that really stood out to them and that they learned from this experience. So the first was that facilitators really developed a deeper understanding of trauma-informed care and relationship-based practice. So one facilitator here says, "It's given me a greater awareness in checking in with people to see where they're at. I might be ready to talk about something, doesn't mean they're ready to talk about it. Or because they've voiced curiosity, doesn't mean that they're really open to that information. More sensitivity in checking in with people, giving them the lead of what they want to discuss." We also saw the facilitators were really feeling more confident and more competent in addressing these issues of trauma and interpersonal violence with families. So one facilitator says, "I think I noticed the red flags more. I'm more confident to have those hard conversations with women. Being able to have those hard conversations and notice the red flags and be more supportive, even outside of this group facilitation, because that's who I am. It's made me more confident and proud that I'm a trained facilitator." And then finally, that facilitators really talked about how important it was that they developed and strengthened their collaboration with other service providers and other service agencies. So one facilitator here says, "I've had the realization of how important it is to work with other agencies to support families and try to see where they're coming from as well, why they're making the decisions they're making." So that's always helpful because sometimes you don't know all of the story. If we turn now to thinking about the impact for mothers who attended the group, we saw that mothers really talked about changes in these kind of 4 broad categories of changes for themselves, particularly in terms of things like forgiveness and healing, self-compassion and self-esteem, changes to their relationships. So both in terms of making changes to current unhealthy relationships, as well as changing expectations for future relationships. Parenting, so in terms of understanding the impact of abuse on children and moving towards positive parenting. And then those support. So having increased support both from the other women who attended the group, the facilitators of the group, and then other community services as well. So again, I'll use some words from the women to describe some of these changes. The first is that women spoke a lot about feelings of empowerment, that it felt really empowering for them to work on their self-esteem, to take care of themselves, and to take control of their lives. So one woman here says, I know for myself, I was able to, because my self-confidence and stuff is growing. I enrolled in university for September, so I'm able now to make choices for me that my daughter will benefit from. And there's nothing holding me back now for making a good life for me and her. I just found through connections, there was a lot of support. I'm allowed to now live my life and better myself for her. Women also talked about changes in relationships, so both in terms of kind of identifying red flags. Some talked about leaving unhealthy relationships or working with a current partner to improve that relationship. And then others talked about having a better understanding of what they want and what they need in a relationship and their role in that, what they needed for themselves. So as this mother talked about, one day I'll feel able to start a new relationship, but not yet. I need more time to heal and work on my coping skills before beginning a new relationship. And then we saw how mothers talked about changes for their children and their parenting. Mothers talked about gaining a better understanding of the impact of abuse on children, like we've talked about today. And then using that understanding to make changes in their relationships for the sake of their children. So this mother says, there was a topic we talked about how the violence that you've experienced can affect your kids, especially if they're a witness to it. If you were still in that abusive relationship while taking connections, it would open your eyes to what your kids are going through. Just to realize that you're better than that and your kids are worth more than being trapped in that situation. Women also talked about the importance of positive parenting, how to support their children's self-esteem, and how to, and that they really gained skills to try to break that intergenerational pathway that we've been talking about. So as this mother says, I want to build my son up. I was able to learn how to build him up and how to not put my abuse onto him. I don't want him to go through what I went through when I was younger, and I don't want his dad to abuse him like he abused me. So it gave me the knowledge and some good skills how to praise him and build him up. And then finally, that link to other community services, right? Women often talked about the importance of these other services that were needed. So they attended this connections group, but really having that realization that they needed other supports and services. So as one mother says, I've taken another group through the community-based projects. I've got my kids in counseling. I'm doing a couples counseling now. And Connections started off that wave. Like it gave me that little push to do everything that needed to be done. So I'll finish off just with these 4 components that we really see in this work seem to be really, really critical in terms of supporting mothers and their young children who have experienced violence in relationships, as well as working with these different community partners to provide support for these families. So the first is thinking about readiness, that there is some background work that needs to be done before a group like Connections or something addressing IPV can be implemented, right? There's structures and supports that often need to be in place in order to provide trauma-based and trauma-informed interventions effectively and safely. And we think about this both in terms of the service providers and the organization, but the women themselves as well, right? That we found there really needs to be this kind of base level of stability that's needed for these families, for these women, before engaging in an intervention like this. The second piece is safety, right? That safety is vital, that having these trauma-informed principles at the core of all of this work need to be established and integrated into these organizations before women are going to feel safe enough to be able to engage in an intervention like this. Next, we've talked about this a lot today, but that relationships are really the building blocks of engagement. Often, women who have experienced interpersonal violence have limited experience with supportive and caring and healthy relationships. And so it's really important for service providers or for those of us who are working with these families to develop compassionate and respectful relationships with women who might be living with IPV. And finally, that collaboration within and across community services seems to be this really key component of change, right? That these are women and families who are often involved with multiple service sectors, and the ability to collaborate and work together with other services can really enhance the support that we can provide for these families. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the session.
Great. Thank you so much, Naomi. What a wonderful job you did describing the sort of the spectrum of work that was done and the outcomes. Lisa, thank you as well for such a wonderful description and insight into Mothers in Mind. So I'm going to turn it over for the final words from Leena, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. And thank you, Naomi and Lisa, and thanks, Deb. We're going to go quickly because we want to leave at least 10 minutes at the end to really address some of these questions. So really, I'm just going to summarize the key points. Really, what we want to really think about is we need to invest in early intervention. That was a clear point. I'm not going to go through these slides. Again, think about really clearly 7 years of warning, 7-year incubation period. We need to make sure that mental health services are accessible. They need to be timely and tailored towards children and adolescents. We heard loud and clear through these incredible presentations that we must support families. And there's some examples: Mothers in Mind, 4th R, Caring Dads, Connections. Sorry, it's a question mark there. It should be a question mark there. And then you also heard from fathers, the few slides on that, and for example, SNAP. Community programs that focus on trauma-informed care really play a pivotal role here. And so we need to really think about that more. Focus on social emotional learning. We talked about emotion regulation, self-control. I'm going to say this quote: imagine a world where our young people are able to stop and think before they act and make better choices. Wouldn't that be really important? Where they can understand the power of their words, can communicate their feelings effectively, and resolve conflicts without resorting to violence. This vision is achievable through committed education and support, which we feel very strongly about. So around prevention, we want to think about education and awareness. Schools, you play a critical role, right, in helping develop healthy relationships, which is what we talked about. Your research 40 years ago was all about looking at schools. And so positive role models, community support programs, engagement in parents and caregivers, and strengthening legal protections for our children are really critical. We also want to make sure that we're thinking about, I think I may have gone, nope, I'm good. We want to think about investing in effective risk needs assessment guides and really identifying and addressing risk factors such as domestic violence, substance abuse, poverty early on that can help prevent future violence. And early identification allows for timely and intervention. Once you know and you assess, you cannot do nothing about it. So we want to mitigate those long-term effects using really good, effective decision-making tools. I like to use structured professional judgment tools, which we call SBJ. The late Dr. Christopher Webster was kind of the grandfather of structured professional judgment. And so I want to really, really indicate how those are important. Here are just some samples. There's one called the Early Assessment Risk List, which we've developed.
That you led.
Developed, and Dr. Dupont Yang also played a role in it, like we talked about. and others. And so really it is about a guide for the middle years. There's also a tool, new one that just came out called the SAPROF child version, and the youth version came out much earlier. It is a structural professional judgment guide for the assessment of protective factors for serious behavior problems. The other one is risk factors. Then there's the SABRI, which has been around for a long time with Randy Borum and his colleagues. But there's also another one called the START AV, which is a comprehensive assessment of strengths and vulnerabilities. So just to kind of put a shout out to risk identification and doing good clinical risk management. So we're going to end with this call to action. Deb and I really together, we and all of us together, we have the power to reshape our society's narratives around violence. We need to be doing that by investing in our children today. We can build a future where respect, understanding, positive relationships, and love flourish instead of abuse and neglect. So let's make it our mission to break the cycle, foster a generation of empowered individuals who choose compassion over violence and understanding over hatred. And together, we can build a more just society for everyone. And the time of action is now. And I love this quote by Pam, oops, went too fast, by Pam Leo, is that we don't want to build, or we don't want to raise children who have to recover from their childhood. And this has been the whole theme today, is the focus on the children. If we don't focus on the children, they become adults. And so therefore, where we just like to say thank you. Okay, everybody. Okay.
All right. So Leena,
There we go.
Leena, Debra, Naomi, and Lisa, I want to really, really thank you for this really, truly moving and special presentation, and above all, for dedicating your life to really take science and make it work for people who need it, to taking the time and, to develop these programs, implement and evaluate them through to full nations, and we all know how hard this is to do it right. So we owe you a lot, not only us who are participating here today, but everybody in the field and everybody who cares about the well-being of youth and families. So thank you very much. One comment that I just wanted to make before I open it up for Dawn and others to comment is that your work is also very much at the cutting edge of conceptually combined, the work that you're doing, of the integration of poly-victimization approaches to trauma and strength-based approaches. Because what you are talking about is that there's not one direct route to this. There is a concatenation of factors at the individual, relational, and community levels that are leading to traumatic lived experiences, and that there are a lot of other strength-based, components that are helping people heal, move out of that, as well as protect themselves. And the two programs that were highlighted here are great examples of that. Great examples of that. My question to the two program developers is that do you have or do you offer technical assistance to agencies who may want to bring your programs into their communities? Because if you have a way to do that, the Melissa Institute, we take a lot of pride on linking our community with any good resources that we can find, and we would love to serve as the bridge for you in that. If you have anything about that, let us know.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay. And now I see Dawn over there.
Well, I want to commend the four of you for an excellent presentation. I will note, however, that with collaboration with David Wexler, we have just written a book about how women can make smart choices and who they hook up with at first. And I think that this book would be really valuable to all of the mothers that Lisa and Naomi work with in order to figure out how they made the choices. If you think back to Tyler, your very first case, the key issue would have been how she got pregnant with such a high-risk guy in the first place. and what would be the kind of decision tree she should go through in order to avoid that. If we want to avoid interpersonal violence in these kinds of situations, the key question is how to help women make smart choices and safe choices in the mate that they choose to begin with. And in fact, if you go to the Melissa Institute, you will see that I gave a podcast a little while ago while we were writing this book on a 5-step program that women should follow, an algorithm to make smart choices. Once again, thank you for your fine contributions, and the Melissa Institute and Society is in your debt.
And Dr. Don Meichenbaum, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your incredible knowledge and helping all of us understand what is important, how to challenge us and push us to think differently. So I cannot thank you enough. We cannot thank you enough. I do have a question that I wouldn't mind posing, and I don't know, Tony, are there questions that we should be putting forth at this point?
Go ahead. You can ask.
Yeah,
some
there's a
questions.
question I wouldn't mind putting forth to Che. If you're Che Latchford, if you're on the line, I believe you might be. Can you help us oh, there you are, Che. Can you help us understand a little bit, why does this service, the father's one, because we heard lots about the two moms one, why does this service specifically targeting fathers, why does it specifically target fathers, and how might that help break the cycle of gender-based violence? You want to just help us understand that piece a little bit more?
Hi, everyone. Absolutely. So quickly, I just want to apologize for not being on camera. Unfortunately, I'm just in transition from one place to the next. But I wanted to speak about the idea that part of the reason why working with fathers in particular is integral in this work is really having a chance to understand the perspectives that holistically make up the decision making regarding intimate partner violence and unfortunately some of the relational elements that contribute to that. And so part of our work at the network and working with fathers is really about understanding some of the socioeconomic conditions that fathers are in, specifically when it comes to relationships, and how we can develop tools and work with fathers to develop unique strategies that focus specifically on fathers.
For joining us en route, because I know you were in your car and you've been listening to this whole webinar.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Tony, were there any other questions? I know there was a lot going on in chat.
I have a question here that is if you I guess for Deborah and you, that what are your guess about what's happening at the age of 14 that is associated with higher rates of delinquency and mental health, the way it is in the research?
I can go first.
Yep,
and then
go
Deb,
ahead.
is that I've thought a lot about this because I couldn't understand, like, one of the goals is we were trying to, in the SNAP program, stop kids from flipping into the juvenile justice system. Because in Canada, the age is 12. So we had to stop it right there. But what we found from the criminal trajectory data that we're looking at, that study, we saw that if they were going to, the peak was at around 14 and a half. And we kept thinking, so I'm thinking about what happens with teens at that phase in their development, right? Like they're in school, there's a lot of peer pressure. They're if they're not fitting in or they're trying to get into certain groups, a lot of young people as well. What we're finding from a criminological perspective, and Deb, you might want to talk from mental health, is that they're using younger kids to do the work for them. So the adults are using younger kids. They may be driving the car, but they're the younger ones are being pushed to go into these homes or do whatever needs to be done. So from that lens, I think that is a little bit of a snippet. There's so much more that I can talk about, but for time's sake, Deborah, with regards to mental health.
Yeah, so what we know is that 70% of mental health problems have an onset before adulthood. So there's, people who end up with serious mental health problems show that. But I think, again, a developmental relational perspective really helps. So many things are developing differently through this transition into adolescence. There's physical development, social development, cognitive development. You know, the adolescent brain is being pruned. So kids have less empathy during the early adolescent years. There are a lot of major changes. And at the same time, their relationships are changing. You know, your parent is never more stupid when you're 13 or 14. Like, their parents are just like, they lose all the intelligence that they could possibly have. And so they're distancing themselves with parents, orienting to peers. And, you know, for kids who haven't had a strong relationship with parents, and those would be the youth that we identify who engage in bullying and sexual harassment and physical aggression with dating partners. Those kids won't be oriented and won't have a moral compass in the same way, and won't have the stability in relationships that you need to manage the bumps that are inevitable in those adolescent years.
They
and
just want to
throughout.
belong. They want to belong, and they're hooking up with the wrong kids. And that's why we talk about the importance of emotion regulation and self-control as being a key factor with what's going on. And that's why we need programs like yours, Lisa and Naomi. And I'm wondering if one of the questions I can ask, we only have like a minute left, is Lisa and Naomi, given that you're working with these young, you know, these women and these young children and stuff, if you had one thing that you felt was absolutely critical in helping these kids, sorry, it's a loaded question, it's more than one, what would that be? What would that be, like, within this last 30 seconds we have? Naomi, you want to go first? And Lisa, you'll have to turn on your volume. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question.
It is a big one. Sorry.
I think, you know, I think it comes back to relationships and understanding that a lot of the mothers that we're working with have not had a history of healthy relationships, right? We talked about Tyler's story and how intergenerational it is. And so having that opportunity, having, you know, whether it's through an intervention like Connections or some other opportunity to shift that perspective and say, you know, relationships can look different, and being able to show mothers a model of how relationships can look different and healthy, I think is really critical in allowing mothers to make changes to their own relationships, to see how they want to engage in relationships with their child. So as people who are working with those mothers, I think modeling and showing a different type of what a relationship can look like is probably the most impactful.
Spot on. Lisa, anything else before, because I know we're over time now.
Relationship. It's all about relationship.
We got it. See, Deb, you're brilliant.
Well, thank you very much. I hope for the audience, for those of you who knows, that you know that this is the type of high quality, high level conversations that I would like to bring to you, and knowledge about how to make your life and the life of those around you and your communities better. I hope that you got a lot out of this, and I invite you to, before I go to I'd like to you to know that Give Miami Day is next month from November 17th to the 21st, and we need your help spreading the word. Give Miami Day is the most important fundraising event in South Florida for the whole year. In the chat, you have seen a link for our Give Miami Day page, which offers you several options on how you can show your support for us, including making a pledge, creating your own peer-to-peer fundraiser, and making a donation to us during Give Miami Day. We ask that you please share the page with your network and help us reach our goal. And we promise in return to continue bringing you this exceptionally good material for you to grow, learn, and improve the life of those in your communities. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leena.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Debra,
you.
Lisa,
Thank you.
Naomi.
Bye.
Bye.